Good morning, everybody. Happy almost Samhain Sunday. It is getting chilly out there, it seems like, in this October weather. And we are really excited here at Earth and Sky for Samhain coming up. Halloween, All Hallows Eve. So many different names for this holiday. And if you haven't already, please like our Facebook page. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Remember to hit that bell button on YouTube so you can subscribe to getting our videos as often or as infrequently as you like. Hopefully you select to get all of the videos, and then you will be apprised of them before anybody else is. And we really appreciate you sharing this video as well. If you find it useful, if you have questions, any of that, please give us feedback down below, and feel free to share our pages out with people too if you're interested. Now, because we are coming up to Samhain, tonight we are having a really exciting gathering. If you're interested in joining in a public ritual celebrating Halloween, we are actually opening this to everybody. If the weather is particularly bad tonight, if it's really rainy and we just can't do it outside, then we will be hosting it at Earth and Sky, but most likely we will be right outside, so join us at the Grand Fountain in downtown Flint at 6 o'clock tonight. Please bring a drum if you have a drum. If you have photos of your ancestors that you would like to honor, because our main point is honoring our ancestors at this holiday, then feel free to bring a photo of your ancestors or multiple photos of your ancestors. And join us at the Grand Fountain in downtown Flint at 6 o'clock. Also, please bring a dish to pass, because we will be feasting afterwards. As if you have been following us with the Wheel of the Year, you've noticed a pattern. Most of these holidays we feast afterwards. It seems like most of the holidays have bonfires and feasting, so we will have both of those tonight. I'd love to have you join us. And with that, we are turning our wheel this year. So I went ahead and turned it before we got started here, but this holiday is Halloween. So most people at this time in our culture recognize it as Halloween, but it's also been known as Samhain, which some people pronounce Samhain. It's actually spelled Samhain, but the proper pronunciation is Samhain. It's also called All Hallows Eve. It used to be called the Feast of the Apples. Some call it the Feast of the Dead, and then November 1st, All Saints Day. So lots and lots of different words for it. We're going to get into all of the traditions and the celebrations and a little of the history and symbolism of that in our life talk today. But I also wanted to just make note of the wheel. So we have our quarter day, actually we have our quarter days here and our cross quarter days here, because as you've been seeing, we've been building this up throughout the year. So our quarter days are the meteorological holidays. So that would be Yule, which is coming up December 21st. That's the first day of winter. You look straight across the wheel over here, and you have Midsummer, which is the meteorological first day of summer. Then you come across up here, and you have Mabon, which is that first day of fall, according to meteorologists. And then you have Litha, which is over here, which is a wonderful time of the fairies coming out. That's the first day of spring. So you have your, spring, summer, winter, or spring, summer, fall, winter. And then you want to look in between each of those to see the next holidays. So you've got Imbolc here, which we talked about with the lambing season. And then the cross quarter days are all Celtic holidays as well. So then you have Beltane down here. You're going to have Lunasa over here, Imbolc, Beltane, Lunasa, and then Samhain, which we'll be getting into today. So if we were going to look at this, so Samhain is really the first day, it's the beginning of the year. So it's, and if you look into the Celtic traditions, they often talk about a year and a day. You will, for hand fastings, traditionally do it for a year and a day. Several different things reference a year and a day. Well, obviously our calendar remains the same, where you have a year, so where does that mysterious day go? That mysterious day that floats is Halloween. It's the in-between times. It's the time where space and time laws cease to exist for this day. So that's right here with Samhain. And then we start the brand new year. So it's an exciting time where we're celebrating the new year. And then we move up here to Yule, which is that first day of winter. That's where we're starting to do that introspection. We're really gathering closely around friends and family at Yule too, because that's when we have gone from the beginning of the year to now bringing everybody together, sharing that love. And then we move up to the very, very first super early signs of spring, even though we're still in winter, those very first signs where you can know spring will be coming soon. That's your Imbolc holiday. And then moving up here to Ostara, where we have fairy season, because the spring signs are really starting to peek through. You're starting to really get those taller shoots, those little first flowers that are starting to come up. And if you notice things starting to go missing out of your pockets and in your house, that could be fairies. And then we move from there up to Beltane, which is that beautiful May Day holiday. This is a huge fertility holiday too. So if you're somebody who is trying to get more fertility in your life, it doesn't just mean babies, anything you want to be fertile in your life, this is a really good time of year to work on that. Then moving over here to Midsummer, which can also be known as Litha, depending on what you want to call it. Several of these have multiple names. And then we have, and so that's that height of the sun. This is where we're celebrating the Sun King in all of his glory. It's the longest day of the year, the shortest night of the year. Then we move up here to Lunasa, which is the first of the harvest festivals. My favorite tend to be the harvest festivals. I like it as the sun starts to retreat. The nights get a little bit longer. I feel like we kind of come in together a little bit more as friends and family this time of year, because we're starting to shut things down a little bit and focus a little bit more on home. So this is where we were gathering the first crops originally. And then coming up here to Mabon, we were gathering the second set of crops. It's the second harvest festival. So throughout the fall, you have different crops that continue shooting up more and more. And so this was the second of those. And then the third and final harvest festival is Samhain. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And it was said originally that if you had any crops left in the field after Halloween, that you were supposed to leave those out for offerings. It was taboo to harvest and eat any of the crops that were left after this feast for the saints and feast for the dead. This is a time of honoring our ancestors. It's a big part of Samhain. That's one of the main things, because it is this time between light and dark. So the nights are definitely noticeably getting longer now. The days are really getting shorter. And this is where we honor that Sun King is actually returning to the underworld. He's closing up. The Sun King is going basically to a death. The earth is going into a death state so that they can be reborn again, because all life gets reborn. We have a circle of life and death. And so often the focus for people who don't understand it fully, they see the focus of death and the ancestors at this time of year, but it's really a cycle of life. It's just as much honoring the death so that we can have that rebirth, so we can have that life coming back out. And often with the fires that they would light at this time of year, the hearth fires, they would sometimes call them bone fires, because instead of just bonfires, because this is not only a time of feasting with the crops that are coming up, it was also a time of feasting with if you're a meat eater, which a lot of people are, feasting on the cows and the poultry and things like that. And so as they would feast on that, they would toss the bones into the fire as also an offering to the ancestors. Another interesting tradition that they would do, in addition to tossing the bones into the fire, they would write their names on stones, and then they would toss those into the fire at the end of the evening and let that burn through the night. And everybody would take a part of the bonfire. They would light their own sticks and carry those home from the village bonfire, and it signified unity, because we all had this huge fire together, and then we light our homes with it as individuals, so we have that unity that will continue throughout the new year. And they would gather back the next morning and check their stones and find out, pass everybody's stones back to their prospective owner, and then depending on the condition of that stone and how it looked, it was a divination tool. So they would have their future year foretold to them by the state of the stone. So similar to reading tea leaves and all of the other divination arts, they would look for patterns. They would look for the condition of the stone. Did the stone split? Is it, what many different things they would look at, and that would basically foretell their future for the upcoming year. So this is also a really big holiday for foretelling your future too. A lot of people come to psychics and mediums and things like that at this time of year because there's that interest in figuring out, where's my life going? It's almost like it's instinctive within people. They just want to know this time of year. We kind of gather back around and we come back to that. After lighting those big hearth fires, when they'd gather their stones back, they would actually spread the ashes out in the fields too, because that would then represent fertility for the fields, giving an offering back to the crops, giving an offering to the ancestors, and then using that energy that they raised the night of Halloween to help boost everything through the winter and to add to when they plant crops in the spring. Being the third harvest festival, dark mysteries is one of the big focuses with this. Life, death, rebirth, all of those introspection things. So the dark mysteries. And dark does not mean negative. It seems like in our culture now a lot of people think of dark meaning evil or bad. It's not. Dark is mysterious. If you think about a child, when the child is in the womb, it's in a dark space. It's in a dark, quiet, calm, sacred, secret space. And so that's the similar essence when we talk about the dark mysteries. That's actually where the tradition of the cauldron comes from. Using a cauldron is that cosmic womb, basically. It's the womb of the cosmos. And so that pot of creation is represented in the cauldron. And also this is one of two nights where spirits are really focused on and awakened. Halloween, and then of course the other one would be the day that is directly across from it. If you look at May Day or Beltane, that is also one where we would touch really straight into speaking with ancestors and talking, that connection with the spirits is awakened at the exact opposite day of the year. Not quite as much as Halloween. Halloween is when that veil really thins fully because it's that in-between day, the day in a year, it's that in-between. All of those laws are suspended. The veil really gets thin from about mid-September until November 11th. There are other traditions that will celebrate this holiday November 1st, November 7th, and November 11th, but it's not like the curtain just opens quickly and then it closes 24 hours later. It is a slow opening in mid-September, and then it peaks at Halloween, and then it slowly closes down until mid-November. Now, for a lot of people, they will be able to feel their ancestors. They'll be able to hear messages a bit easier because the veil is thinner. Our ancestors are always with us, whether we can see them or not, whether it's May, June, or July. Our ancestors are always with us. They're able to connect with us at any time. And there are some people like me and several other people who can tap into and hear and get messages from the ancestors. But there are a lot of people that just aren't as in tune with those abilities as a general throughout the year. And this time of year is a great time to really hone in if you're wanting to work on that skill. If you're wanting to open up, this is a perfect time of year because it does get a little bit easier. I also recommend, if you're wanting to practice that yourself, doing it at the in-between times. Sunset or sunrise is a really good time to do it. And also in the evening. Usually if I do group readings or things like that, I tend to prefer doing it in the evenings because to me it feels like when it's darker outside, the world kind of quiets down. There's not as much chaos. There's not as much hectic, busy activity going on. So it makes it easier to focus in on and reach out to the other side. Because energy is energy and it travels all around us. We're connected to all of that. So as the world kind of slowly slumbers, then we can open and hear that a bit easier. Honoring the wisdom of the crone and her consort are really a big part of this holiday as well. Some would refer to them as the dark mother and the dark father, although those could be termed seeming to be scary in our modern culture. And that's another interesting concept too, because the Dark Mother, meaning the crone, meaning the wise woman who has a lot of experience under her belt, who has a lot of stories to share. And in our culture these days, so often we do not treat elderly people with the respect that they deserve. We do not recognize them as having the wisdom that they have. Oftentimes in our culture, so many people will believe that those in the prime of their lives, maybe 20 to 50 years old, they know everything, they can handle everything, and children don't, and the elderly don't. Well, that's really backwards. That's not quite there, because the crone has all of the wisdom and experience of being a child, of being a mother, and now being a wise woman. And also her consort, a sage, would be the same thing. So this is a time to honor that. So maybe there are elderly people in your life that you could reach out to and just ask them to open up about some of their stories and listen to some of their wisdom. Ask them questions that you might have about life and see what kind of answers they have. Some of them might not resonate with you, but some of them might. You might be surprised at what you might hear. Honing your psychic gifts under the moonlight is also a wonderful thing to do this time of year. It sounds very romanticized, or Hollywoodized, but it really does. The moon has such an effect on our lives because we are made of so much water. And when you think about the fact that the moon has this magnetic ability to pull our ocean's tides and have such a huge impact on the water of the ocean, if we are, I forgot what the percentage is, that we are water.
80,
That's what I was thinking.
yeah,
Close to 80%.
80.
Yeah, and so then it's going to have that impact on us too. So you can work on those introspective arts, the divination, things like that when you're, out with the moonlight. One of the names of this holiday traditionally was the Feast of the Dead, and this was named because of their tradition of leaving food for the ancestors. So people will sometimes even leave a place setting on the table or leave a place setting of food at their doorstep so that the ancestors are honored, and during their passage, while this veil is thin, some believed that the ancestors would go to the Summerland on this night specifically, so it would help them in their passage to be able to have that plate of food. Some will set a chair at the table and do a full plate setting or do a small plate setting for them there. And it's a great time to be able to talk with others in your household about those that you love as well, bringing up their memory, talking about the things you loved about them, talking about what maybe you've learned from them. And lighting a white candle can also be a very effective way to honor your ancestors. They would do that traditionally to help light their passage. And another thing I loved with this holiday is that they would traditionally also bury apples at the side of the road at this time of year for those ancestors that don't have anybody that mourns them, because there are some people in this life that don't really know people. They haven't had close family or friends, and so they might not have had a funeral. They might not have people that recognize their name, but by burying apples at the side of the road, you can honor them, and that leaves food for them during their passage as well. And people would often originally dress up to confuse the spirits at this time of year. They would either wear all white, kind of representing that image of ghosts, which is funny because most ghosts don't look like they're all white, but that's often a perception of them. And sometimes they would wear straw, sometimes they would wear the clothes of the opposite gender in an effort to confuse the ghosts. So it's a really interesting way of how that tradition started. And then it was when the Christians tried to bring the holiday up for their own, they tried to make it Michaelmas, honoring Saint Michael. And when they weren't able to lure the populace away from it for Michaelmas, they started to add in their own intonations. And so they made the costumes scarier. And that's where we started getting the jack-o'-lantern costumes and hideous masks. And the Christians leaders were saying you need that to protect yourself from evil spirits. Well, traditionally, Halloween was nothing about evil spirits. It was just about a day that a lot of our ancestors would walk among us. So it's kind of been carried on now at this point where the scarier masks and things like that. They would also say that you needed to carve turnips for protection. And that was a Celtic thing, actually, originally, with carving the turnips. And they would leave the turnips in their windows, so they would carve giant turnips. They would carve faces in them and leave them in the windows. And then that's turned into jack-o'-lanterns. So as the Christians were taking it over, saying there were evil spirits, you need to hide yourself with scary-looking masks. And then they would also make the turnips into lanterns, so they would walk the streets carrying the lighted turnips while wearing the masks and scaring the evil spirits away. So it's really interesting the way now that has turned into trick-or-treating. And so, let's see, any of the crops that were left in the fields, I'd already mentioned that, were to be offerings, not left to eat. So you can imagine this time of year leading up to this day was a very busy time, because the crops were something that they needed to sustain themselves through all of winter. We didn't have grocery stores then, and so you needed to make sure you had everything pulled in. I'm sure they would leave a few intentionally for the ancestors, but this was a very busy time. So leading up to this, in a very, very festive and excited night, full of all of the joy, knowing that all that hard work was done, so that now we have a time to rest. Now we have a time to come in for introspection. I think we need that a bit more in our culture too, those separations of time, so that we can know when our really busy season is to push, and when we have that time to step back and just relax and enjoy it and spend some time with our loved ones. Samhain is really a lot about rebirth and death. This is also a time to introspect and think about what it is you've had this last year, what it is you've gained, what you've enjoyed this last year, what are the blessings that you've had, where have you grown yourself in this last year. It's a time to really look within and see everything that you've done over this last year, because it's New Year's. A lot of times in our modern culture we do this at New Year's Eve, but traditionally it's really this time that we do that, because we're getting ready to go into that darker cycle with the winter coming. And so taking that time now to really do that. And then also, it's because it's the time of the death, it's time to also look at what it is you need to let go of too. What is it maybe you've lost this last year? Have you lost people that were really close to you? Have you worked to go through the grieving process? That process takes time, but maybe there's some things that you need to do to vocalize it, or to go through some counseling possibly, or do some writing to really work through that death. And then also, if you've had a loss of a job, if you've had a loss of a home, maybe you've downsized and that's something that you haven't quite got yourself feeling settled with yet. And so it's looking at all of those things that maybe you feel like you've lost, and acknowledging that it's something that you've lost, because that's one of those steps with it too, is acknowledging the death, whether it's a physical death or something else that you feel like you've lost in your life, acknowledging that so that you can go through the grieving with that, so that you can bury it, and then you can find out what strength you have to move on and what else you can bring in your life to fill that space. Because anytime we lose something, we create space within ourselves. So this is a good holiday to acknowledge it, to revisit it, to pay attention to it. Think about your ancestors that you've never even met yet too. This is a great time to think about, your great-great-great-grandparents, things like that, those generations that were gone before you had a chance to get here. So many people are starting to really get into genealogy now, which is a fascinating thing to look at this time of year as well. So all of those things are really symbolic. Some of the symbols that are common with Halloween: gourds, apples, pumpkins, besoms, cats, and black cats, witches, all of those things. There's a lot of symbolism within each of those too. Like for black cats, that's one of the questions I've had a couple times from people. They actually represent the magic circle with the brim of the hat, and then the cone pointing up has a few different things. Most commonly, it was there are some cultures that talk about how the higher the hat is, the greater the wisdom that the person has. So the elders in the group, this is, I can't remember the name of the groups in Africa that do this, but the elders that have the most wisdom within the group have the highest hats, and it's just that acknowledgement because it's kind of reaching up to the heavens, so to speak, with the cone. And it also represents the cone of power, which is represented both in that wise spirit, but also if you look at it as that magic circle with the brim, raising the cone of power in the middle, that's what is done in all of the rituals, because, and that's what's done in Christian churches too. When you get everybody singing and clapping and raising that energy in the middle of the service, that's that raising the cone of power in the Christian church. They do the same thing with chanting and singing and dancing in traditional Celtic culture as well. And so that's represented with the hat. Then the pumpkins actually are represented because of the carved turnips that they would have. And then when the colonists came to America, they found Native Americans were growing pumpkins, and those were a heck of a lot easier than carving turnips. So that fit very well to replace that tradition. The besom, which is another word for a broom, is very symbolic this time of year too. You'll see even at the craft stores, you see all of, actually I wanted to get a little besom, but it didn't work out. I think we have plenty on here. But the besom is wonderful for sweeping out negativity, cleaning out the old. Last week in our live talk, we talked about how to sage your house. And one of the important steps at the end of saging is you end at the front door and then you sweep off your front porch. So if you have an actual besom or actual broom, then you can physically sweep it off, and that just clears it out. It always feels good when you clean your house, whether it's physically or spiritually. And so that ties the two in together with the broom. Often when people will cast a circle to prepare to honor the ancestors, they would use a broom to sweep off the edges of the circle, clean it out, and then you're ready because you've cleared out the negativity. We really need to do that more in our culture, in our lives, is focus on, if you've had a really stressful day at work, or if you've had an argument with your loved one at home, get the broom out, sweep out the area that you're in, because you have all of that clutter, that energy dust that, is like cobwebs in your energy field. So using a broom, just sweep all of that out. You'll notice the difference right away. And so that's one of the symbols with brooms. And then with brooms, you often will see images this time of year of the witch riding her broom, flying off over the moon. I wish I could make my broom fly. I have not figured that out. But traditionally that actually came because when they would plant their crops in the spring, a lot of people, and it really doesn't tie into witches, but a lot of people would take brooms out into the fields and they would jump up and down while looking like they're riding the brooms, because brooms are a symbol of fertility. If you look at it, it has a very phallic-like appearance to the broom, and the traditional materials, the types of wood that they would bring together represented the masculine and the feminine. So they would actually take it out to the fields and jump up and down with the broom, trying to show the crops how to be fertile and how to grow for the year. And so this was, a few hundred years ago, a few hundred years ago. And so with that, there was a period of time where deadly nightshade was quite common. I can't remember where this was at, but what it seems to be dated back to, I believe it was deadly nightshade, that was a hallucinogenic. And so people didn't realize that they were hallucinating, and they were seeing these people jumping up and down in the fields with their brooms and imagined they were flying over the moon. And they ended up, eventually they would use that as a drug to astral project as well. So you combine all of those factors together and you get the flying over the moon thing. So herbs for this time of year: mugwort, allspice, catnip, deadly nightshade, oak leaves, straw, and sage are all traditional herbs. I would not recommend deadly nightshade for people. But those are if you're ingesting it or making it into a tea. But any of the others, if you're wanting to make it into herbal teas this time of year, herbal tea is a really good thing to use this time of year as well. Other foods that are traditional for this holiday would be apples, turnips, nuts, and then any of the like beef or poultry, as long as you're not a vegetarian. Gourds are also really big this time of year. Pears and pomegranate. And pomegranate is a really interesting fruit this time of year because if you slice it in the middle, you'll notice that it has a star in the middle. Well, the star kind of ties in all of the elements. So you have earth, air, fire, water, and spirit all tied in together. So that would quite commonly be used this time of year to represent the wholeness of everything, the wholeness of living with nature, the wholeness of living in harmony with nature, and that honoring that cycle of the year. Ale and cider and pumpkin, really big this time of year as well for the holiday. It's really a time to come to terms with death, and really coming to terms even with your own death, and being able to lose that fear of death, and knowing that even when death comes, rebirth comes afterwards. There's nothing to fear. It's this continuous cycle, just like our wheel is a continuous cycle of nature, continuous cycle of the holidays, continuous cycle of the crops coming up, being able to feast, harvesting them, and then the earth kind of dies again so that it can come back the next year. So getting your head around just coming to terms with that, accepting it, knowing what it means to you is really big this time of year. And this time of year, Halloween always falls in the astrological sign of Scorpio, which is really a time of letting go of old hurts, releasing past wrongdoings and hurts. And so often I've seen so many times when people have a loved one that's died and they have certain things that they feel like they didn't get said, or they had an argument, or they had something that they felt that they're holding on to. And this is a great time of year to really let go of that. If you feel like you want to write a letter to an ancestor, whether it's to release past hurts or whether it's just to express your love and how much you miss them, this is a great time of year to write a letter to the ancestor and then throw that in the fire. It might be your first fire for the year too. It's just been recently starting to get cold in this area, so you can throw it in the fire in your fireplace or have a big bonfire outside. That's really the traditional way to do it this time of year. I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into this holiday, and if you have any questions, please let us know down below. I hope you enjoy your Halloween this coming week, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'd love to have you join us this evening if you are local to the Flint area. Please remember to like our Facebook page, subscribe to us on YouTube, and share our video if you enjoyed it. Thank you. Have a great day.